wanted to wander, this is one.
Okay. Thanks so much,
man.
Mark.
Oh, yeah,
Appreciate
sure.
it. Oh, we're
Didn't mean
going
to
in
leave
for
you
it,
hanging.
yeah.
Sorry.
I was like, is it a hug, is it a handshake, or is it nothing? Wow. Hello, everybody. I feel so exposed, Mark. You were like, I should have seen it coming. You're like, tell me some fun facts about yourself. I didn't realize, so I can share it to everybody. Great. Especially after we've had a wonderful musician come up, and I'm like, by the way, can we give another round of applause for David Ward? That was fantastic, man. I feel even more nervous now following up with that. I feel like, David and Mark, you've really gotten a positive mood in this room. And I'm here to just make you guys worried, I think. You'll find out later why, but and also, I should start by saying thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for this. That's really cool. Who needs Photoshop or airbrushing anymore? Just get someone to paint a picture of you. That's pretty nice. We appreciate that. Okay, well, I should get to the talk and start a timer, because I care about these things. So the talk is about treasure, titles. And I was thinking about what to talk about this topic, and conveniently came to the realization that I feel like I'm working on a video right now that is pretty aligned with this, and I know it's a bit lazy, but I'm like, I could also just repurpose that script for this talk and not have to create something new. So today is going to be a little bit of you guys are the guinea pigs for a video that I'm working on, and before I begin, please lower your expectations a little bit. This is a half-written, half-formed idea that I'd just like to test by you guys and see what you think. I don't know if, Mark, you gave it away too early, but I was gonna do a little bit of our audience participation. The theme is treasure, and I feel there's one thing us Canadians, maybe us North Americans, really, really treasure, that we really prize. Any clues, any guesses? Oh, cars. Very relevant, but I'm thinking of another thing. Maple syrup. Okay. People. Think of something a bit more tangible here. Your house. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, you invited an urban planner to a talk. This is what you get. I'm sorry. To me, this is something that I always felt growing up very aware of. I grew up in Langley for, context here, and sort of the go-to thing for everybody that I grew up with was you want to get, stable, gainful employment, don't do what I did, get a YouTube career. You want to find a real job, have a real house, that's what your life, that gets you made in life. I thought this picture kind of demonstrated it well. My partner was looking at this while editing, and she was like, did you generate that in Midjourney or something? And I'm like, no, I'm giving a talk to a bunch of designers. I would get skewered. This is actually from a couple of rubber tire ads from the 60s. And I found it kind of interesting that, you're a rubber tire company. You could be the American dream or the way is owning a car. But no, it's actually, owning a house. And I was like, okay, that says something maybe. But you know what else says something are the numbers. So right now in Canada, about 66.5% of Canadian households are homeowners. But what I found was even more interesting is us millennials, that are always complaining about we can't afford housing, this is hopeless. Apparently when you survey us, still the vast majority of us are either already owning housing or would like to own a house. But maybe to some extent this is not really news to people. I don't want to be redundant here, but I'll say one more thing that I thought was really interesting to me is that this whole home ownership culture that we have in North America is one that is heavily subsidized. So this is just a sample of some of the federal and provincial subsidies, tax breaks, tax exemptions that are available if you want to buy a house. And I'm not going to go through each one of them one by one, but feel free to take a photo, or if you want to, note it for future reference. The imputed rents one is really interesting. But one poor PhD student did attempt to calculate and sort of look into what all these incentives look like, and the figure they came up with for 2008 was 15.8 billion for just the federal portion. I don't even know what the BC number is, but like just for the federal government, $15.8 billion is like the fourth largest tax expenditure in this country. We are sending a very clear message to people living in Canada. If you want to own your home, we very much want you to do that. We're going to really support that. And like, I feel like, I didn't even plan on saying this, but I'm like, I'm not here to like bash that. Like that's not my aim here. And I think as you'll find in this story, like it's very complicated and nuanced, as all stories are. But I thought this really drew up a question, which is simply, why do we do this? And that is sort of the topic of like the video that I'm hoping to create around this topic. So I came into this video with a lot of assumptions, which is basically, home ownership societies, homeowners in general, it's really important for having a strong middle class, really having like a strong economy. Homeowners are more engaged, have more participation, care for their neighborhoods better. And I think perhaps I'm seeing some people nodding heads, like perhaps you've heard that sort of narrative before. But when you kind of dig into the actual research about this, the picture becomes a bit messier. So totally to validate, there's absolutely correlation. Like homeowners, there are like correlated effects where there is, basically what I talked about. But, for the economists or, statisticians in the room, there's no causality. It's very, very difficult to establish causality. And I'd like to kind of like demonstrate that a little bit. I don't know if this is like the most fair argument, but obviously we have countries like Germany where the country has one of the lowest home ownership rates globally. There are much fewer incentives for home ownership, and the country doesn't fall apart, right? And if in case anyone's interested, these are the top 10 sort of highest rates of home ownership in countries around the world. And so, when I look at these sort of figures, there's not really any compelling evidence, let's say, or data that really supports the idea that governments should be subsidizing to this extent people owning their homes. So to me, that's where the story got interesting. It's like, okay, if it isn't like data-driven, like where is this sort of ideal coming from? Where is sort of our desire, like what is this culture, really rooted in? And my take, and I'm hoping to share today, is like, I think it really comes from our history. And I hope we have enough time for this today. Actually, I'm doing pretty good for time. Part one is feudalism. Yes, we have to go all the way back to feudalism. I mean, I think arguably you could go back to just when societies and civilization and agriculture first started, but for the sake of time, again, we're going to start with feudalism. And so maybe some of you are very familiar with feudalism, learned about it in high school or whatever, but a quick refresher is feudalism, it's a society where a select core group of wealthy nobles own all the land, and then there are peasants, the serf class, that is allowed to, or sometimes forced to, live on those lands and farm it in exchange for either a portion of their crops being given to the lords, or sometimes just rent, pure money. And that's like a story that I was quite familiar with, but what was kind of interesting to me as I was researching this video was what happened to those peasants? Because clearly feudalism isn't a thing today. What was that transition like? And it turns out it was mass evictions. It was basically farming technology is getting a lot better, and we don't need as many people, working the fields anymore. Like this, ox and cow can do the plowing for you. So all you extra people that don't have work on the land, you're out of here. And that's kind of what happened right from around the 1200s up to the 1800s. So it was and obviously I'm glossing over a lot of things here, but let's say that there was a bit of a painful evolution from feudalism to kind of this more industrial capitalist society that we know today. And so what happened to all these peasants is they were evicted and then they ended up moving to the city. Think of the Dickensian London, where you have new industries popping up for sure, and there are some jobs and opportunities for sure. But because there are, first off, we're again, a select few groups of people own all the properties. And there's so many of these like evicted peasants moving to these cities that there's just such crowded living conditions, so much competition for the jobs. People are working for basically poverty wages. Children are working, you know what I mean? Maybe I'm being a little bit over the top here, but basically it was not a good time. But luckily for these sort of evicted peasants, they were about to get a big break. And that big break was North America. And their immigration policy was literally free land. And this is a interesting sort of poster I found from Canada's Dominions Land Act sort of strategy. And as you can see there, if you move to the last best west, because America apparently was like already getting settled at that point. So like Alberta, Saskatchewan was like, if you were a little late to the train, Canada's west was for you. But you got 160 acres of land. It's pretty crazy. And that is a lot of to your like struggling working class person living in London or Paris, this was like a pretty dang good deal. But important caveat, because I really can't stress this enough, this was not our land to give, you know what I mean? It was definitely stolen from indigenous people, and I think it's very important to understand that like our home ownership sort of culture is very much rooted in a lot of injustice to begin with. Just wanted to get that out of the way. But nevertheless, that sort of program was the start of literally hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming to North America, farming land, and in exchange for that, basically getting to keep that land. A very kind of lucrative deal. And to me, like I said, this is where sort of the seed of this home ownership society is planted. You have a lot of kind of working class immigrants coming from Europe because their experience has been like, we have been stripped of our agency and stability because we weren't owners of our land. Basically, we always lived on other people's property, and they kind of pushed us around like pawns, from the lords of the fiefdoms to the industrial aristocrats of London. And so to them, you can really imagine, like, having your own piece of land was a really, really, really big deal. But that couldn't last forever. And so that's where, I'm gonna come up with better titles for the video, I promise, but this is part 2. So kind of fast forward to the early 1900s, cities are urbanizing in North America again. So, with industrial, businesses coming over to this continent, like people that were, mostly farming were now kind of moving back to city. People were, again, not really owning property. And it was kind of turning back into more of like, echoes of industrial European cities. And that all changed with the Great Depression. And what the Great Depression meant for cities in North America is that the people, property owners, basically completely stopped investing in their housing. It was just, the economy is collapsing around you. Why would you invest in your apartment, in your tenement apartment? Who knows what the economy is going to be like? And so what that really resulted in, and one of the big pain points of the Great Depression for people, was the housing conditions became miserable. This is a photo from New York's tenement apartment. It's from 1916, so I guess it's not really relevant to the Great Depression, but I think it kind of painted a picture of just like how brutal it could get. And for the governments of both Canada and the US, this sort of storm of events really created the impetus to kind of kickstart that next era of home ownership. So 1944 is sort of like is an iteration of many, like you know what? No, this is way too nerdy. I don't need to get into it. But basically, all you need to know is that in 1944, we invented the mortgage. And people that weren't able to get loans before because you need to basically pay for the property up front, were now able to get that through the government's new mortgage programs. Initially, the CMHC was formed to literally give out the loans themselves. Then they transitioned to insuring it. Again, maybe it's getting a bit too nerdy, but this is sort of the next era. Is the government's idea was hey, if the housing conditions are deteriorating and people are just really miserable in their apartments, we should get them to own their houses, and that will really solve this sort of crisis that we're in. That coincided really nicely with a couple of innovations in technology, housing. There were some construction innovations. The 2x4 was kind of invented around this time, so a little bit of standardization. People could build things pretty quickly. There was also, of course, the automobile, right? Cars, and that really allowed for a new sort of type of home ownership to really emerge, the suburban house, right? It also didn't hurt that this was also one of the strongest periods of economic growth where people had a lot of money to invest into building housing and buying housing. But yeah, the real message from the government at this time was, if you are an average person in this country, we really want to encourage you to actually just own your house to find stable, good quality housing. They did try some other things. There was public housing that was really, that the government really got into in the 60s and 70s. But I really want to stress that this wasn't considered for normal people. And I don't know if that's quite the right way to say it, but it was really, if you couldn't get into your own house and buy it, there was, this sort of safety net for you. So, my whole sort of takeaway from that, era is really the government saw home ownership still as a way to helping people build stability and good quality housing around their lives. And I really, I think there must have been, and this is sort of the half-formed idea, so I don't know, totally conjecture at this point, but sort of the echoes of the Dominions Land Act and the Homesteading Acts were really playing a role here. The government had options, right? If housing is bad, the government could build good quality housing for, working class people. But no, the option was always get people to buy their houses, and especially suburban houses, at least in this time. Okay, we have part 3 now. And this is to me where I'm there's always a part in my stories where and then something happened, something went wrong. Basically the first thing that sort of kind of came to fruition is that government started realizing, this sort of suburban sort of style of development, awful. It is so wasteful on resources. It is very unsustainable to maintain those roads. We got to rein it in somehow. And so these are a couple of examples. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. In the Greater Toronto area, they introduced the Greenbelt starting in the 80s in Vancouver and sort of broadly throughout BC, the Agricultural Land Reserve in the 70s. And that was really part of this grander effort to rein in this sort of outgrowth of cities. And you see environmental movements popping around that time. There's just really this awareness that oh my gosh, this sort of type of development that we're seeing right now, not sustainable, not great, let's rein it in. And I applaud that effort. But as you can see, it might have created some problems later. At the same time, you got strata acts. This is sort of the idea of you can own your own box within a building, and that was a legal innovation. And to me, there were sort of the right moves set in place to kind of welcome in a new era of home ownership, so to speak. Instead of living in your suburban house outside of the city, we could theoretically be homeowners, quote unquote, within denser urban areas. But that ran into an issue, which you guys knew this was coming up at some point, right? Or maybe this, I don't know. Everyone here familiar with zoning bylaws? I don't know if I need to do a refresher on that. Okay. You've seen the videos, missing. All right, okay. So obviously there are regulations around housing development in our cities, and I think this is something that was not really considered, is that infill development, building denser housing within established neighborhoods is just so much more difficult politically and in some ways structurally than just building infinitely out into greenfield sites on the edges of cities. And so you have projects like this, which are, great, dense, all that, but incredibly complicated, very political, of course, and even just from a financial perspective on a square footage basis, very, very expensive to build. It's not, the higher you build, doesn't make at least the building cheaper. If the land is super expensive, maybe it does, but I will move on here because that is definitely the nerdier part. At the same time, the government also stopped investing in non-market housing. They kind of, through a variety of budget cuts, decided this was not a priority for our government anymore. And so The numbers are brutal, but what you can see is like right from 1965 to 1994, you have like quite a swell of government-funded housing being built in our country, and then it drops off a cliff for like 2 decades. And in that time, there's just no government support coming in for housing at all. So unsurprisingly, the amount of housing we built over time decreased. In the 1970s, about 0.8 homes were built for every new Canadian, whether it's immigrating or being born here. And in the 2010s, that had come down to 0.48 homes built for every new Canadian. It's about a decrease of 40%. And that kind of introduced a whole other sort of sector to our housing system, let's say, where, you have fewer and fewer housing being built for new people coming into this country. The government's definitely not letting go of home ownership incentives, so there's all this money coming in for people buying housing. That sounds like a great investment. That sounds like a lot of people could make some money off of that situation. And maybe unsurprisingly, that's exactly what's happened. Housing, I mean, you've all seen the graphs. I don't want to depress people here. It's the morning. But I think that's, to me, that's at least my attempt at trying to get that story right. But back to home ownership. When you check in on it today, it is on the decline, actually. It kind of peaked around 2011. We had about 68, 69% of the population owning housing. Today, it's gone down to, well, I said it before, 66.5%. And when you kind of zoom into specific age groups, I'm glad some of you got that. Yeah, I know. You find that younger people are, on average, owning, or less, for a variety of reasons, who knows, not owning housing as much. And so I feel like, the situation today is really, if you can buy a house, you're either incredibly lucky, you made a lot of money, I don't know, in Bitcoin, or you inherited a good amount of money from your parents, and I'm like, power to you. But if you are trying to do it yourself, you have to go into a lot of debt. A 30-year mortgage, probably $1,000 in mortgage payments. You're arguably over-leveraged in one asset. It's very risky. It's not stable. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like this sort of original kind of idea we had around homeownership. But on that same coin, or the other side of the coin, if you rent, like, may God have mercy on your soul, right? Like, it's bad for both parties. And so, all right, aren't we so happy right now? So what do we do? And I'll be honest with you, I had some slides prepared about like, oh, here's some solutions, here's what we could do, but like a few things. I'm pretty sure I would piss a lot of people off once I start going into like, here's what we need to do, and whatever. B, I want you to watch the video, so I'm not going to give away the ending. And C, Mark told me this was a 20-minute talk, and I'm at 22 minutes right now, so I'm going to... No. I don't want to talk about the solutions. I think that's really, that's D, yeah. So to me, I just wanted to end on this slide again around our idea of treasure, because the reflection that I'm kind of having, as I research and write this topic is that maybe somewhere along our journey for home ownership, we kind of lost the plot. And for me personally, I would argue that the reason why, we wanted so many people, so much of our population to own their housing was really rooted in good intentions. I would say it was around stability and agency, that you could feel stable in your housing, that you had the freedom to, not have like a lord, evicting you because you weren't needed anymore or whatever. And I would just, like, whatever we end up pursuing as a solution here in Canada, I would think it'd be important to keep what those root intentions were. What are we actually treasuring here? Was it the physical house, or was it something else? So that's my talk today. Thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I can leave now.
You can, no, don't. Thank you to all the volunteers for making this happen. Okay, get up here, sir. Here, I'll let you use this guy. You can walk around.
Okay. Ooh, I get to walk around now. All this freedom. You can come over here.
Okay.
Yeah, get this camera guy.
Who has awkward questions for a planner? Ian does.
Oh boy.
Oh, also, everybody, please, when I give you the mic, stand up and introduce yourself. It's easier for the cameraman also to track you.
My name's Ian. My question is, with the amount of people we're inviting to move to Canada and the discord between the amount of housing we're developing, are we really inviting people disingenuously?
Oh, I feel like that's the statement. I do. It's kind of funny. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, as maybe you can tell, but I've kind of gotten into the habit now of like watching a lot of these like newcomers experience to Canada vlog, and what you see a lot is like people really, really struggling with the housing, with the financing, and I do feel like in the long run that's gonna bite us in the back. It does feel like, I mean, and I don't know if there's an easy solution to that issue necessarily, because I'm not gonna be the one to stand up here and say like I understand why certain immigration targets are set and all that, but like I kind of, at least for now say that like, that if we can figure out the housing situation, maybe that would help a little bit. Yeah.
My name is Victor, and first of all, thank you so much for this presentation and for all of your videos. I'm a big fan. Just first, a brief response to the previous comment. As a person who immigrated to here 4 years ago, I'm really thankful to Canada to be able to receive me. And I think people make their own decisions when they decide to come here, and they watch the same YouTube videos, so they are aware of the situation. And my question is, do you think removing incentives can help to drive housing prices down? Of course, best solution is
We're getting into the solutions. We're giving away the story.
Yeah, probably.
No,
it's not the best solution, like building more housing and things like this, but it seems like incentives are given to everyone and supply is not increased, so just this money goes back to housing and housing prices.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, I don't have a great answer to that question yet, and I've been really trying to think of what makes the most sense here. I'll say that, like, kind of to my surprise as I was writing and researching this, I'm not entirely, like, I don't think getting rid of the incentives doesn't sound like it would actually be a great idea, especially some that are around, like there's one around like the capital gains tax exemption on principal residences, and obviously, yeah, if you bought a house in Vancouver in, 1980 and it's appreciated times, 10, 20x, whatever, it feels icky that you wouldn't be able to tax some of that profit. But what I've realized is like also that it's a mobility issue. Like if you sell your house, you shouldn't be necessarily, like it would be nice to also stay in the community, if that kind of makes sense. Right, so it's definitely not as simple as like get rid of the incentives that fixes everything. I really, I feel like this is one of those like wicked problems where there's a lot of blame to be kind of passed around. I do think though one thing that's kind of becoming apparent to me is, what we could do is really provide a lot more support for renters. And I feel like in the midst of this housing crisis, that's ultimately who's the most impacted by costs and by the lack of stability. And so, I mean, I brought up the example of Germany. Like one of the reasons why renting is so much more popular there is you have just way more rights as a renter, and it is treated as like a very acceptable form of stable, dignified housing. So, without getting into it too much, maybe those are some thoughts for now. Back here, okay, of course.
Hi.
I'll just follow the mic.
I have 2 questions from the Zoom audience.
Ooh, okay.
And you get to pick which one you want to answer.
Oh.
So we have from Paul.
Okay.
What are some ways people who are very interested in urban planning but have no training in it can participate beyond filling out city questionnaires? That's your first choice of question. Your second choice from Sandra in Burnaby is, how likely is community-owned nonprofit housing to increase in Metro Vancouver?
Oh. Yeah, and I'm not going to discriminate here. I'll answer both. Yeah, Paul, definitely my recommendation is not to start off by, going to a council meeting. Let's say that. It's not a fun time. And to me, some of them, yes, I don't know if there are any counselors here. No, sorry, no offense. But I actually find that some of the most fun I've had really engaging and learning about urban planning is actually getting involved with activist groups, hub cycling, especially these days with some of the closures of bike lanes around Vancouver. Like, there's a really fun group. It's like just good friends to begin with, right? And I think that's really at the root of a lot of great interests, is like a great community. So hub cycling, I think there are other sort of, I don't know, for me, like urbanist groups. So there's like an urbanist Discord chat. I forget the name of, but like it's a lot of fun, just like kind of trying to find the community around sort of these issues. So that'd be my kind of main recommendation, the foray. Obviously, watch the videos as well. That's a great way to get passionate. I'm kidding. And then as to like the question of like, do I think it's feasible to build more nonprofit housing? Absolutely. I mean, you saw the graph, like clearly there's a lot more role that the government can come in, and we have historical precedent for, senior levels of government providing more robust funding for non-market housing. But I do want to caveat by saying that at least like in the short term, we can't solely rely on publicly funded solutions, and we should be looking for like literally anybody that's involved in making housing, we should be making it easier to build that housing. My thoughts. I hope I'm not pissing people off. Okay. More questions.
We're at 10, so
Okay.
we're going to maybe take 2 more questions.
Sure.
You good with
Yeah.
that?
And it doesn't have to be housing related.
No.
You can tell I'm not like very
I
confident.
see enthusiastic hands over here, and these people have fallen asleep.
That's true.
And a half a hand. Is it a good one? Are you into this? Come on, are you committed?
Oh boy. Okay, fun.
Hi, I'm Marty, and
Marty.
your channel's great. Well,
Thank you.
I do enjoy it. So living in Vancouver, we hear density, 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 but we don't often hear about the quality of what we're building and what is the suitability of those spaces for the people that are living in those spaces. What's your take on that? Should the city council be more involved in the actual layout of the space, what's being built, or is it about getting as many people with a roof over their heads as possible?
Oh God.
Please don't put
Some really
city
easy
council in charge
lowball
of
questions.
layout.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, yeah, a difficult question, admittedly. I kind of want to be careful. I try to be careful when I'm thinking about housing quality, not to insert like a very privileged lens of what quality housing looks like. And I think it looks very different. Like, like my ideas of what like is acceptable as housing, it might be very different for another person. And I don't know if it's really the best idea for us to be really dictating what quality housing looks like. That being said, I think there are certain patterns that emerge, especially when we overtly see housing as an asset, where I think people make deep compromises now on their housing quality just because we're doing anything we can to just get a step on that ladder of ownership. So, for someone like myself, like maybe it'll be possible if I want to really get into home ownership. My options are incredibly, incredibly limited, I would say, in terms of quality. And if I really want to own my house as an asset, that's going to be the trade-off I make, I think, to some extent. And yeah, to me, maybe there is this broader question of like, if we didn't treat housing as so much of an asset that like it's really about saving money at all costs in this investment, we could give a damn about other qualities of our housing. So maybe that's my answer there.
One of my thoughts is that
Of course.
What you're really talking about in some ways is about identity and vision. And that is where city council and the policymakers need to set a path where we get to inform them in terms of what does the policy that guides housing look like that prioritizes who we want to be in the future and how we want to live. And a quick plug, that guy, put your hand up. That's Bruce Hayden.
Bruce.
Bruce Hayden has
Big fan.
developed a platform that uses a cluster of technology that takes architectural design, like the layout, punches it into a computer with the aid of AI and some inputs, and evaluates and scores it based on criteria under what he calls sociability. So if our future identity is we want highly social, community-oriented, healthy places to be, there are tools emerging. And if anybody wants to talk to Bruce about that, there are tools now, Vancouver-based tools, open source you can use, tools to establish whether or not a particular one design is superior in meeting those goals to another. And if we can get City Hall to pay attention to that stuff, we might get somewhere. Okay, now, with apologies, I'm going to wrap this up. There's been a lot of male-identified people speaking today. And I just realized that our musician was male, and I'm male, and he's male. And so let's go with where's a non-male identified voice who can ask our last question? Where you put, okay, really,
back.
one of my own. Oh my goodness.
Hi, I just want to know what made you go into YouTube, and if you could just give us a quick rundown of your creative process before creating a video.
Oh.
I'm Vanessa.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
How much time do we have again, Mark?
None.
How did I get into? Yeah, right. How did I get into YouTube? The very simple story is. When I was in urban planning school, there were a couple profs that had the option to hand in a video essay rather than like an actual written assignment. And I was the guy that always I was like, yeah, I've got to do the video essay. It sounds fun. And it always ended up being more work, but it was always more fun for me. And so to me, that kind of sparked my initial love for making films. In terms of my creative process, it's pure chaos. I don't know if I can really give too much. I think just overarching things is like I really try to approach every story with curiosity and some degree of humility. I've never had a story start out or end up the way I imagined it would end up starting, and I think that's really healthy to keep in mind. And then some more practical stuff, create an outline and a script before you hit rolling on the cameras. It's always way too chaotic if you're like trying to film stuff and then you're like, what do I have, and write stuff, and just try to segment the pre-production, production, and post-production into their own nice categories. There will be overlap always, but trying to keep the chaos somewhat organized is always a good idea.